Hello and welcome to the Whistling Podcast. My name is Frederick Darnaby. Today we'll continue our exploration of the history of whistling. Our second paper on the topic was written by A.V. van Stekelenburg of the University of Stellenbosch, entitled Whistling in Antiquity. So let's first answer the question, who was A.V. van Stekelenburg? When I first found this paper and started working on this podcast, I couldn't find any biographical information on him. I found his office phone number at the University of Stellenbosch, and I had in the back of my mind that maybe he was still there and I could actually ask him for an interview, as improbable as that might be. As I was doing more work and more reading, I tried once again to find more biographical information. I am interested in the motivation for the scholarly work into the history of whistling, and I thought and still think that the person behind the paper is important. As I did with Peter F. Ostwald, I wanted to know more about the author. As I did more digging, I finally found more about his life. I found out that he left this earth in 2003. His full name is Albert Victor van Stekelenburg, or Bert, more personally. I will post a link to an article written about his life entitled In Memoriam, written by Jo Marie Claassen, also of the University of Stellenbosch, which I will read a portion of now. In Memoriam, Albert Victor Bert van Stekelenburg, March 31st, 1940 to March 11th, 2003. The South African classics community and a large circle of friends in Stellenbosch, Cape Town, and virtually every other corner of the globe were saddened to hear of the loss at sea of Bert van Stekelenburg, former chair of the Department of Latin at Stellenbosch University. He fell overboard about 4 sea miles from the coast of Chile, from the ship in which he was returning to Patagonia from an expedition to watch a particular species of penguin in its own habitat. He will be missed by colleagues and friends for his warmth, sense of humor, and consistent self-irony. An ostensible pose of being a bombastic Hollander hid true humility and deep kindness. Born at Eindhoven in the Netherlands in the early part of World War II, Van Stekelenburg, at a very young age, decided both that he liked birdwatching and that he did not want to stay in the bleak, cold climate of his native land. In 1965, he started his career teaching classics at Dutch academic high schools. In 1971, he received a doctorate in classics from the University of Leiden, after a stint of research that took him to Rome from 1968 to 1969. His thesis was published as
Redevoeringen bij Cassius Dio. Orations at Cassius Dio.
1971. During 1972, the young graduate took some time off to travel through Africa, literally from Cairo to the Cape, and gravitated to Stellenbosch, where he found a vacancy in the Department of Latin. In the following February, he started here as lecturer, beginning a career that lasted until 1996, when he took early retirement as professor and head of the Department of Latin, but continuing as part-time lecturer in the newly formed Classics Department until 1998, after which time he on occasion taught as guest lecturer, as well as acting as a frequent and popular public speaker. His facility with languages, both ancient and modern, and his deep learning were phenomenal. Within the first year of his migration to Stellenbosch, he was already publishing in Afrikaans. So this article goes on to list all of the topics and research he did into the classics, and because of time I'll leave that to the listener to investigate. Of course, I'll leave a link to this article and some others that give more information on Van Stekelenburg's career. The article we're discussing today was published in 2000 in Antiquity, which is a journal published annually by the Department of Ancient Studies at the University of Stellenbosch, which is in South Africa. So I have to say, rest in peace, Bert, and thank you for your research. I don't know if Bert whistled, but as an avid bird lover and is interested in whistling in antiquity, I imagine that he did. So let's begin with this article. What Dr. van Stekelenburg is trying to investigate is if there is any evidence in Greek and Roman literature for the existence of musical whistling. We'll see if he is successful or not. And now here is the first example that he gives from Trimalchio's dinner party from Gaius Petronius's Satyricon from the late 1st century AD, now in progress.
As far as I was concerned, the lamps already seemed to burn double, and the whole dining room was going round, when, "See here," Trimalchio spoke up, "haven't you anything to tell us? You haven't entertained us at all, have you? and you used to be fine company, always ready to oblige with a recitation or a song. The gods bless us, how the green figs have fallen." "True for you," the fellow answered. "Since I've got the gout, my sporting days are over. But in the old times, when I was a young spark, I nearly sang myself into a consumption. How I used to dance, and take my part in a farce, or hold up my end in the barber shops. Who could hold a candle to me, except, of course, the one and only Apelles?" He then put his hand to his mouth, and hissed out some foul gibberish or other, and said afterwards that it was Greek. Trimalchio himself then favored us with an impersonation of a man blowing a trumpet, and when he had finished, he looked around for his minion, whom he called Croesus, a blear-eyed slave whose teeth were very disagreeable.
Plocamus, one of the guests at Trimalchio's dinner party, when encouraged by his host to give proof of his histrionic and musical talents, is only keen to oblige.
Opposita cadosma non escio quid taetrum exibilavit quod postea Graecum esse affirmabat.
And he put his hand to his mouth and whistled out some terrible stuff I couldn't identify. Afterwards, he told us it was a Greek air. If we were to pose ourselves the question whether Antiquity knew the phenomenon of people whistling tunes, this episode from Petronius's Satyricon seems to provide us with an affirmative answer. Unfortunately, however, though most translators take
exhibilavit
here to mean whistled, it is also possible that the verb is used by Petronius in a metaphorical sense, as it is by others, to describe a squeaky voice, and this possibility dashes our hope of ever finding an answer to the question whether Greeks and Romans did whistle tunes, because this episode in Petronius is the only one that seemed to hold a promise of providing us with a positive answer. It must be added, though, that such an answer would here in any case not be satisfying. Plocamus would have been doing what Hesychius calls whistling through the fingers, that is, imitating the sound of a flute while using one's fingers as a substitute for an instrument. This is a different way of whistling from that which one practices purely with the lips, which is the kind of whistling in which we are interested here. So it is refreshing to hear someone focusing in on musical whistling with the lips, as we saw last episode in the article by Peter F. Ostwald. He was all over the place when talking about the history of whistling, pipes, flutes, musical instruments, and speech synthesizers. Van Stekelenburg is more focused, but unfortunately we see that translation problems get in the way of knowing for sure whether there was musical whistling in antiquity. Both Greek and Roman societies knew a great variety of songs, for drinking, for tilling the land, for processions and festivals, lullabies, love songs, drinking songs, soldier songs, songs for anniversaries, etc. Most people must therefore have been familiar with a large number of melodies from vocal music. Melodies without words were also constantly played by soloists like shepherds on their flutes and panpipes, and by the tibia players who adorned banquets. Would nobody then have ever whistled or hummed a tune that he had recently heard, or that he could not get out of his head? It is hard to believe that this never happened, but strangely enough, these specific forms of simple and private musical enjoyment have left no trace in Greek or Roman literature. In the last paper discussed, When People Whistle, by Peter F. Ostwald, he touched on the class and status issues related to whistling. It seems to be a behavior frowned upon by the upper classes, and this seems to be problematic for the attempt to find instances of whistling in Greek and Roman literature. I don't know if this still holds in most Western countries. I live in China and have a personal anecdote about this. Whistling does occur in China, and when I perform in bars here, when I do a whistling solo, it seems sometimes annoyingly that it is a cue for the whole audience to try to whistle along with me. I hear whistling on the streets, mostly by the working class and shop owners, and I haven't taken precise notes, but I think I probably hear whistling every day. When I have taught English to elementary and middle school children, I've gotten into a bit of trouble. I have a compulsive whistling habit, and I have found that if I whistle in class, I will frequently be joined by my young students, and sometimes they won't be able to stop. I was actually asked by one of my bosses not to whistle in class, although being compulsive, I can't really stop. Anyway, my wife, a Chinese woman, has asked me to never whistle in front of her mother. Whistling here seems to have the same stigma, that it is only bad people or 坏人 who whistle. I think I have mostly been able to restrain myself in this situation. I don't really think that the consequences would be that serious, but you never know. Her mother is in her 80s and has seen a lot of things in her life, and I wouldn't want to insult or disrespect her in any way. I intend to do a podcast about this very topic, whistling in class, and maybe I can figure out why, in particular in China, this is considered a bad thing. Anyway, back to the article. Here's what Bert says on that subject in regards to Greek and Roman literature. We must realize, of course, that whistling of any kind belongs to that category of casual and inutile utterings or gestures which in antiquity were considered vulgar and not to be indulged in by people of status. For much of Roman history, gentlemen were not even supposed to sing. When Cicero mentions an acquaintance's love for singing, his emphasis on the person's being a
pater familias
and an
equus Romanus
testifies to the rarity of such a phenomenon. In this regard, as in other aspects of genteel deportment, antiquity was close to the Renaissance in the 19th century, when singing or whistling in public were seen as, quote, the marks of clownishness and folly, unquote. Whistling a tune would therefore not have been compatible with the characters of many, if not most, of the personae in ancient literature. Apart from that, however, it is a remarkable fact that we also never meet a slave, fisherman, pimp, or soldier whistling a tune, not even in comedy. Alright, well, so far so bad. We'll move on to the next section called Whistling and Paralanguage, and in case you're not aware of what paralanguage is, and I am almost as ignorant as you are, here is the definition. Paralanguage is nonverbal communication, such as your tone, pitch, or manner of speaking. This also can include things like laughter, gestures, and facial expressions. Dr. van Stekelenburg also includes whistling as an example of this. Whistling and paralanguage. In modern Western literature, activities such as whistling and humming occur mainly as concomitants of moods or mental states. To make a character whistle a tune can be used to indicate he's feeling carefree and happy, for instance, whistling while one works. It can, however, also be used to convey carelessness or indifference, or in seeming contradiction, loneliness, and stress, as will be illustrated later. A sensitive observer is able to interpret the different messages implied. Whistling has therefore become part of the paralinguistic repertoire of Western literature.
With him there was his son, a young squire, a lover and a lusty bachelor, with locks curl as they were laid in press. Of 20 years of age he was, I guess. Of his stature he was of even length, and wonderly deliver, and great of strength. And he had been some time in Chevachi, in Flanders, in Artois, and Picardy, and borne him well, as of so little space, and hoped to stand in his lady's grace. Embroidered was he, as it were made all full of freshe flowers, white and red. Singing he was, or fluting all the day. He was as fresh as is the month of May. Short was his gown, with sleeves long and wide. Well could he sit on horse, and fair a ride. He coulde songs make, and well indite, joust, and eke dance, as well portray and write. So hot he loved, that by night or tale he slept no more than doth the nightingale. Courteous he was, lowly and serviceable, and carved before his father at the table.
The young squire in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, singing he was or floiting all the day,
singing he was, or fluting all the day,
may have been the first character in Western literature to have his personality as a, quote, lover and a lusty bachelor, unquote, highlighted by a reference to his habit of singing and whistling. Greek and Roman literature, though not short of lusty bachelors, offer no precedent to the squire's carefree whistling. With no references at all relating to musical whistling in antiquity, we will have to resist the temptation of indulging in speculation and guesswork as to the reasons for this lacuna. Maybe whistling was much less common than it would be later. Maybe in antiquity, if they did not sing, people hummed rather than whistled, but we are just as badly informed about humming as we are about whistling. We have seen how Petronius tempts us and ultimately disappoints us, though through no fault of his, to believe that one of Trimalchio's guests is actually whistling a tune, The episode, whether Plocamus
Plocamus
is whistling through his fingers or squeaking some cheap ditty using his hand as an amplifier, is, however, still a good example of the sociological use of paralanguage, typifying this common freedman for what he is. So there we have in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, one of the first mentions of whistling in English literature that we know for sure is Whistling as We Know It. I will skip the next section entitled Whistling in the Dark. There is only more bad news there. We move on to the section called Semaphoric Whistling, where the lack of evidence leaves us guessing as to the occurrence of the whistling of tunes in Antiquity. We move on safer ground when dealing with the use of whistling for a more prosaic purpose, that of nonverbal signaling. One may accept that this use of whistling goes back to times immemorial. Man will have discovered the effectiveness of whistling to attract the attention of others or of animals at a very early stage. Homo habilis may already have used it to maintain contact while hunting or scavenging, and the first pastoral communities will have used whistling to signal their flocks and their dogs. A number of communities, for instance in the Pyrenees and on the Canary Islands, developed whistle systems as speech surrogates, especially for long-range communication. The oldest reference to the semaphoric use of whistling is in Isaiah 5:26, where the Lord whistles to summon his people.
ונשא נס לגויים מרחוק, ושרק לו מקצה הארץ, והנה מהרה קל יבוא.
Quote, he will raise a signal for a nation afar off, and whistle for it from the ends of the earth, and lo, swiftly, speedily it comes, unquote. Or from a different translation,
and he will lift up an ensign to the nations from far, and will hiss unto them from the end of the earth. And behold, they shall come with speed swiftly.
The Hebrew uses the form of the verb
sharak,
which the Septuagint and the Vulgata translate with appropriate forms of
Sirizin
and
Sibilare.
Here and in the two other episodes, where
sharak
is similarly used for the Lord's summoning from afar. If you are paying attention to our esteemed LibriVox reader, you'll also remember that he translated the same verb from the Latin as hiss instead of whistle.
He then put his hand to his mouth and hissed out some foul gibberish or other, and said afterwards that it was Greek.
And we'll now take up that problematic issue now. Whistling and hissing. It may seem strange that modern translators are not unanimous in their renderings. Some make the Lord whistle, but others make him hiss. Underlying this discrepancy is a particularity which will continue to bedevil our inquiry, namely the fact that Antiquity did not differentiate between whistling and hissing, so that
sharak
Sirizin
and
Sibilare
were used to describe either of these sounds, where circumstantial evidence here and in several other loci favors the meaning of whistling
Sirizin
and
Sibilare
are more commonly used to describe the sound of flutes, which often is akin to that of human whistling, and a variety of hissing and related sounds like that of a hot iron submerged in water, the rustling of leaves, the whizzing of arrows and spears, and the sound of the storm wind in the cordage of a ship, which particular sound, of course, can alternate between hissing and whistling. I was an avid Bible reader when I was a child, and I remember one particular verse from Genesis. Genesis 3:8 says, "Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden." I would like to imagine the Lord taking a stroll in the garden whistling a tune, maybe How Great I Art, while checking in on his little human experiment and admiring his own handiworks. But could it be that the Lord was strolling and hissing? That changes everything for me. Maybe the serpent, who we suspect was a hisser, was actually a whistler and beguiled humans in this way. I don't really believe any of these stories anymore, but it might be food for thought. Maybe whistling really is an evil activity and brought the downfall of man. That is, bringing free will into the world. I'd like to imagine the incident something like this.
And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam, and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself.
If you've made it this far, I highly appreciate it. I thank you for your indulgence while I pretend to be a scholar of some sort. I assume my audience has dropped off considerably, and I may even be an audience of one at this point. Because of that, I am going to break up this article into 2 parts to give you, my listeners, a break. In the next podcast, we'll join Dr. Van Stekelenburg once again as he takes up the issues of the cat call, the wolf whistle, and whistling in magic and superstition. For thoroughness, I'll also talk about some other examples of whistling in history not mentioned in Van Stekelenburg's article. Thank you once again for listening. Avoid the plague, and I'll see you next time.